Real stories, real emotions, and unreal visuals. We give you 20 seconds of pure impact that starts right now and stays with you long after the video ends. Don't settle for the ordinary, subscribe now and never look back on your journey.
The night my mother-in-law handed me a glass of champagne at my own anniversary party and whispered, "Congratulations on 5 years of being useful," I smiled and took a sip. I didn't drink it. I never drank anything she poured. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been waiting for exactly this night for 3 years, and I was ready. Let me back up. My name is Vivienne. I'm a forensic accountant, which means my entire career is built on one skill: finding the thing someone desperately doesn't want you to find. I married into the Caldwell family 5 years ago, and for the first 2 of those years, I genuinely believed I had married into something beautiful. My husband, Marcus, was warm and thoughtful and funny in this quiet way that only came out when it was just the 2 of us. His mother, Adeline Caldwell, ran the family's commercial real estate empire from a glass office downtown and sent me flower arrangements every Monday morning. I thought she was generous. I thought she was welcoming. I thought a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. The flowers, I later discovered, were delivered by the same service that swept our home for listening devices every 6 weeks. Adeline arranged both. The morning of our 5th anniversary, I woke up early and lay still in the dark for a long time, listening to Marcus breathe. He was sleeping deeply. He always slept deeply on days when his mother had called him the night before. I had documented this pattern over 14 months. Phone call from Adeline, followed by 3 to 4 hours of Marcus being quietly absent, followed by deep sleep, followed by a version of my husband who was just slightly off. More formal. More careful with his words around me. Eyes that tracked me the way you track something you've been told to monitor. I slid out of bed without waking him and walked to the guest bathroom at the end of the hall. The one room I had confirmed was clean. I sat on the edge of the tub and opened the encrypted folder on my phone. Everything was there. 4 years of bank transfer records. Wire transactions flowing from 3 Caldwell shell companies through a law firm in Delaware and landing in an account I had traced to a behavioral consultancy called Meridian Group. I had spent 6 months finding Meridian Group. When I finally did, I found that its sole contracted client for the past 11 years was Adeline Caldwell. Its sole contracted service, what the invoices described as executive continuity support. I found the man behind Meridian Group 4 months after that. His name was Dr. Philip Strand, and he had a private practice in Scottsdale and a second office he didn't advertise, in a corporate park 20 minutes from the Caldwell family estate in Connecticut. His specialty, according to his published work from a decade ago before he went quiet, was compliance psychology, the study of how external structures could be used to shape decision-making in high-functioning adults. His last published paper was titled Voluntary Compliance Architectures in Family Business Succession. I had read it 3 times. Marcus had been seeing Dr. Strand since he was 19. Adeline told him it was executive coaching. I checked my watch. 6:45 in the morning. Our anniversary dinner was at 7 that evening, at the Caldwell family's private dining room on the 42nd floor of their downtown building. Adeline had arranged it. She had arranged everything. The guest list, the seating, the menu, the remarks she would give. Marcus had told me about the remarks last week, slightly apologetic. She just wants to say a few words. I had told him that was lovely. I went back to our bedroom, dressed quietly, and made coffee. When Marcus came downstairs 40 minutes later, he kissed my cheek and said happy anniversary in the voice I had come to think of as his corporate voice, smooth, appropriate, slightly hollow. I handed him a mug and asked how he'd slept. "Fine," he said. "Really well." He smiled at me with his eyes pointed somewhere just past my face. I told him I was going to the office for a few hours before the dinner. He nodded and didn't ask why. In the elevator down to the parking garage, I pressed my back against the wall and breathed slowly. I had learned to do this over the past 3 years, to treat emotion the way I treated volatile financial data. Acknowledge it, log it, set it aside. There would be time to feel everything later. Tonight I needed to be precise. The Caldwell building had a particular energy at night. During the day it hummed with the specific busyness of people who have money and move it around constantly, assistants and associates and brokers cycling through the lobby in expensive shoes. At 7 in the evening, with most of the floors dark, it felt like a stage set. The 42nd floor private dining room had floor-to-ceiling windows facing the harbor. and by the time Marcus and I stepped off the elevator, the room was already lit up against the dark sky like something designed to impress. 26 guests. I counted immediately, the way I always counted, the way I cataloged everything. Adeline stood near the window in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than our first car payment, silver hair swept back, watching the elevator doors with the alert stillness of a bird of prey. Beside her, Marcus's cousin Theo, the family's in-house legal strategist, was already working his way through a glass of bourbon, and in the far corner, just settling into a chair with a glass of water, was a man I recognized immediately, even though we had never met in person. Dr. Philip Strand. I had found 2 photographs of him online, both from conference programs years old. He looked smaller in person, softer around the eyes, nervous, I realized. He was watching the elevator, and when our eyes met briefly, he looked away first. Good. Adeline moved toward us with her arms slightly extended, the particular greeting she reserved for people she considered audience members in her ongoing production. She kissed Marcus on the cheek, then turned to me and took both my hands in hers and said, 5 years, the way someone says, checkmate. 5 years, I agreed. She kept hold of my left hand a beat longer than necessary as she guided us into the room. Behind us, I heard Theo say something in a low voice to the man beside him, and I caught 3 words before the noise of the room swallowed the rest. Needs to happen tonight. I spent the next hour being the version of myself they expected. Warm and gracious and slightly deferential to Adeline, never so much that it seemed calculated, but enough to confirm their understanding of the hierarchy. I complimented the room. I thanked Theo for coming in from Boston. I talked about the new project Marcus's team was launching and let Adeline correct 2 details about it without visibly reacting. Marcus stood beside me most of the evening, attentive in the way he was always attentive at family events, present and correct, like a security system with good manners. At one point he leaned down slightly and said, "You look beautiful tonight." It was not the way he used to say it. Once, 3 years ago, he had said those same words into my hair in the dark, and I had felt them land somewhere real. Now they arrived delivered, like a package someone else had addressed. I touched his arm and said thank you, and I meant it in a way he didn't know yet. Thank you for being here. Thank you for still being findable underneath everything they've done. Thank you for not being entirely gone. I had never stopped believing the real Marcus was still in there. That was, in the end, the reason I had spent 3 years building a case instead of just walking away. I had seen him, the actual him, in flashes. Reading on Sunday mornings, laughing at something unexpected, looking at me sometimes with the confusion in his eyes that I thought was him trying to reconcile 2 different sets of instructions about who I was supposed to be to him. I wasn't leaving until I could give him back to himself. Dinner was served. Adeline had designed the seating so that she anchored one end of the table, Marcus and I were positioned at the center, and Dr. Strand sat directly across from us with a clear sightline to Marcus's face. I had expected this. It was consistent with what I knew of the methodology. The behavioral consultant positioned as a live monitor, reading Marcus's responses in real time and feeding corrections through Adeline. I had seen this architecture in 3 different family sessions going back 7 years, documented in notes I had obtained from a paralegal who had since been relocated to a Caldwell satellite office in Phoenix. As the main course was cleared, Adeline tapped her glass. The table quieted. She stood. She thanked everyone for coming. She said she was grateful for this family and for this company and for everything the Caldwells had built together. And then she turned to look at Marcus and me with an expression she had clearly practiced, because it landed just 2 degrees off from genuine warm without the warmth, proud without the pride. Marcus chose Vivienne 5 years ago, she said, and I want to say tonight that I have always understood what he saw. She is capable and careful and deeply committed to this family's interests. What Marcus built over these 5 years, this company, this stability, this future, he built it with a partner who understood her role. I held my smile completely still. Her role. There it was. She reached into the fold of her jacket and produced an envelope, which she set on the table in front of Marcus with a small ceremony, fingertips resting on it for just a moment before she stepped back. In honor of 5 years, she said, the family board has voted to formalize the succession structure. Marcus, as of tonight, you are named sole executive successor to the Caldwell Group. She paused. The terms are in the envelope. The table applauded. Marcus reached for the envelope with both hands. I watched his face as he read. I had seen those documents before, not the final version, but a draft that had come across a shared drive account 3 weeks ago and sat in a folder for 11 minutes before someone realized the sharing permissions were wrong and revoked access. 11 minutes was enough. The terms were not what Marcus believed them to be. The succession would vest solely in him, yes. But Clause 14, buried in the financial schedule on page 9, required that his primary residence and any marital assets remain in a Caldwell family trust structure, administered by Adeline, for the duration of his tenure. Effectively, congratulations, you inherit the company, and your mother controls everything you own in exchange. I watched his eyes move across the page. I watched him slow at the bottom of the third page. I watched him slow at the bottom of the third page. I watched him look up at his mother, and then I watched Adeline lean down toward him, very slightly, and I heard her say 2 words close to his ear. "You're ready." It was a trigger. I had suspected it was a trigger, and I was still not fully prepared to see it work. Marcus's posture changed, not dramatically, not in a way that anyone without 3 years of documentation would have noticed. His shoulders settled differently. His hands flattened on the table. The slight uncertainty I had seen in his eyes when he read the documents dissolved, replaced by something resolved and opaque, and when he turned to look at me, it was not Marcus looking at me. It was the compliance architecture Strand had built, wearing my husband's face. He said, "I need you to sign this too." I said, "What does it say?" "It's a formality. Spousal acknowledgement." "Can I read it first?" Across the table, Strand shifted in his chair. Marcus said, "Vivienne." Just my name and a tone I had never heard him use before, flat and loaded at the same time, a warning in borrowed clothing. "It's our anniversary dinner. Just sign it." I looked at him for a long moment. 26 people in the room. Phones on tables. 2 people near the window who I knew, because I had done my homework, were not simply guests. One was a notary Adeline used for private family transactions, and one was an attorney from the firm that managed the Caldwell trust structure. I said, "No?" 1 syllable. "Quiet." Adeline straightened up. Marcus blinked. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'd like to read it before I sign anything," I said. "That's not unusual, Marcus. I'm a forensic accountant. I don't sign documents I haven't read." Something flickered in his eyes. I wasn't sure which part of him it was coming from. Adeline stepped in smoothly, as I had known she would. "Vivienne? It's standard spousal acknowledgement language, nothing more. Our attorney can walk you through it tomorrow if you'd like, but tonight I'd like to walk through it now, actually." I opened my evening bag and took out my reading glasses. "I apologize. It'll only take a minute." The room had gone very quiet. I read the document slowly and carefully, and I did not let my expression change as I read Clause 14. I finished, folded the document back along its original creases, and set it on the table. "There's a problem," I said. Adeline's voice was controlled and cool. "Vivienne, I think you may be misreading. Clause 14 transfers co-signatory authority over our marital assets to the Caldwell Family Trust for the duration of Marcus's tenure." I kept my voice conversational. The way I kept my voice conversational. The way I kept my voice conversational in depositions. That's not spousal acknowledgement. That's a structural transfer of financial autonomy. "Marcus, did you know this clause was in here?" Marcus looked at the document, then at his mother, then back at the document. Adeline said, "The trust structure is designed to protect." "Protect who?" I asked. Silence. I took out my phone. Not the phone they knew about, the other one, the one that had been in the interior pocket of my evening bag all night. I set it on the table, face up. On the screen was a document, the first page of a 400-page evidence file I had uploaded to a secure server 3 days ago with instructions to release to 4 federal agencies, 2 investigative journalists, and the firm that managed the Caldwell Group's outside investors if I did not enter a specific 12-digit code by midnight tonight. "I want to tell everyone in this room something," I said, and my voice was steady because I had practiced this moment in the guest bathroom mirror for 6 weeks. "What you're all witnessing right now is the last step in a compliance architecture that my mother-in-law has been running on my husband since he was 19 years old. The document she just asked me to sign would complete it. Marcus would have full succession, and Adeline would have full control of Marcus." Adeline said my name sharply. I looked at Marcus. "The man you've been seeing for executive coaching since your 2nd year of business school isn't an executive coach. His name is Dr. Philip Strand. He's sitting across from you right now. He specializes in behavioral compliance methodology. He has been meeting with you on your mother's contract for 11 years. She pays him $42,000 a month through a company called Meridian Group. The room was completely still. Marcus turned very slowly to look at Strand. Strand did not move for a long moment. Then he picked up his water glass and set it down again without drinking. His hands were not steady. He started. I have the bank transfers, I said. 4 years of them. I have the contract between Meridian Group and Adeline Caldwell. I have your session notes, not all of them, but enough. I have the methodology documents you filed with a research ethics board in 2014 and then withdrew. I have recordings of 3 family meetings in which Adeline gave you specific behavioral objectives for Marcus. I paused. I have more than enough. Marcus said my name, not the flat-triggered version. The other one, the real one, the one from Sunday mornings in the dark 3 years ago. I heard the difference immediately. Vivienne, he said, how long have you known? I started finding pieces about 2.5 years into our marriage, I said. I didn't understand what I was looking at for a long time. The first thing I noticed was that you behaved differently after calls from your mother. Then I noticed that the differences were consistent, like they followed a pattern. Then I found Strand's name in the Meridian invoices. Why didn't you tell me? This was the question I had thought about the most. I had written 3 different versions of the answer in my journal over the past year. Because I wasn't sure you'd believe me, and because I knew that if I confronted this privately, it would just disappear. The documents would disappear, Strand would disappear, and your mother would find a way to reframe it, and you'd be left with nothing but her version. I met his eyes. I needed it to happen somewhere it couldn't be erased. He looked at me for a long time. Then he looked at the document on the table. Then he looked at his mother. Adeline had not moved. She was still standing at the head of the table, and if you didn't know her well, you might have thought she was composed. But I had spent 5 years learning the margins of her expressions, and what I saw in her face right now was not composure. It was the specific stillness of someone calculating whether they still had a move. This is a private family matter, she said finally to the room at large. And I think Theo should probably stop moving toward the door, I said, without looking at him. Theo stopped. I want to be clear, I said, that I am not interested in destroying this family. I am interested in one thing: stopping a system that has been running on my husband without his knowledge or consent for over a decade. Everything that happens next depends on the choices made in this room tonight. I looked at Strand. Dr. Strand, I told you before I came tonight that you would have a choice. That offer stands. Full cooperation with the federal investigation gets you consideration. Your attorney knows how to reach mine. Strand's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Then he put his napkin on the table and nodded, once. Very slightly. I looked at Adeline. The succession document stands as written, minus clause 14, which our attorneys will renegotiate. The Caldwell Group goes to Marcus, actually to Marcus, not through you. I picked up my phone. In about 40 minutes, a journalist at the Tribune is going to receive a preliminary briefing from my attorney. What she writes will depend on how cooperative the family is between now and then. Adeline said, very quietly, you planned this. I planned for something like this, I said. You planned for me to sign a document and smile and not know what it meant. We were both preparing for tonight. The difference is that I was preparing for the version of tonight where I could still respect myself in the morning. Adeline looked at Marcus. I could see her start to reach for whatever phrase it was, whatever the next trigger was, whatever Strand had built in for moments of resistance. She opened her mouth. Marcus said, don't. Just that. One word. And the particular way he said it, the fact that he said it at all, that he saw it coming and stepped in front of it, told me that the real Marcus was not only present but oriented. He knew what she was about to do. The room stayed quiet for a moment that seemed longer than it was. Then one of the guests near the window, one of Adeline's closest allies, a woman who had known the Caldwell family for 30 years, picked up her bag and said she thought she'd give the family some privacy. Others followed. Not all of them, but enough that the room began to breathe differently. Adeline's attorney, the one I had clocked near the window, approached her quietly. I watched her listen to him, watched something in her face close down as he spoke. She nodded twice. Then she looked at me. This isn't over, she said. I know, I said. I filed in 3 jurisdictions. It'll be a while. She left. Theo left shortly after, already on his phone. Strand remained at the table until the federal agents arrived 40 minutes later. I had timed the call to coincide with the journalist briefing. He gave a preliminary statement that night. His full cooperation followed over the next 3 weeks, and the documentation he provided about Adeline's instructions regarding Marcus was more detailed than anything I had managed to find on my own. Marcus and I sat at the long anniversary table after the room had emptied and didn't talk for a while. I ordered us both coffee from the one server who had stayed, a young woman who seemed to be processing the evening with remarkable professionalism. Marcus held his coffee mug with both hands and stared at the harbor through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "The summer I was 23, he said finally. I told Strand I wanted to leave the company. I wanted to go live in Portugal for a year and just write. I had all these ideas for a novel." He stopped. I woke up the next morning and the whole idea seemed stupid, embarrassing. I couldn't even remember why I'd thought it was a good idea. I waited. "That happened a lot," he said. "I know," I said. "It wasn't just Strand, she did it too. In conversations. She had phrases, ways of framing things. I always thought I was just changing my mind." He set the mud down. "I didn't know I was being managed." "You weren't weak," I said. "They were systematic. They're systematic. There's a difference." He looked at me. There was something in his expression I hadn't seen in years, a kind of rawness, an undefended quality. The face underneath all the architecture. "Why did you stay?" he asked. "For 3 years knowing what you knew. Why didn't you just leave?" I thought about the Sunday mornings, the laugh, the version of him that surfaced sometimes when his guard was down and his mother's voice wasn't in the room. "Because I was already building a case," I said, "and because I could see you in there. The real you, trying to get out." I paused. I couldn't leave someone in a burning building just because the smoke made it hard to find them. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I don't know what I actually like, what I actually want. I've been someone else's decision for so long." He stopped, started again. "I don't know who I am outside of what they built." "That's the most honest thing I've heard you say in 3 years," I said. "That means you're already in there." We left the building at midnight. The Tribune's story went live the next morning. The federal investigation that followed lasted 14 months and resulted in charges against Adeline for conspiracy, financial fraud, and violations of 2 separate statutes that my attorney described as unusual, but perfectly applicable. Dr. Strand's cooperation was instrumental. He lost his license and faced his own proceedings, but the cooperation agreement held. The Caldwell Group's succession was restructured by a court-appointed administrator. Marcus took over, the real version of it, without Clause 14 and without his mother's co-signatory approval baked into every decision. The first thing he did, on his own initiative without anyone suggesting it, was commission an independent ethics review of all current company contracts. The second thing he did was take 2 weeks off and drive up the coast with no itinerary. He sent me a photograph from Maine, a rocky stretch of shoreline at low tide, with a message that said, "I think I like this." I kept the photograph. It took Marcus almost a year to fully disentangle from what had been done to him, longer for some things than others. There were days he called me unsure whether a preference he'd expressed was his or an old instruction he hadn't located yet. We talked through it. We saw a specialist together, a therapist who worked with coercive control cases and had no patience for the idea that being systematically conditioned was something you should just get over quickly. Marcus went alone some weeks. I went alone some weeks. We were careful and slow about everything, and I think that was right. What he said to me 8 months after the anniversary dinner was this: "I keep wondering if you fell in love with me, or with the version of me you thought was underneath. What if the real me isn't what you imagined?" I told him that was a reasonable thing to wonder. I told him I had wondered it too. And then I told him what I had actually observed, over 5 years, in the moments before the architecture snapped back into place. The specific small things that I had logged, not as evidence but because they were his, and I wanted to remember them. The way he read, the way he got stubborn and funny about certain kinds of injustice that he thought no one was paying attention to, the way he had looked at me, once, standing in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning with no particular reason, like I was something he could not believe was real. "I fell in love with that," I said. "I can wait while you find out if it's still in there." He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The Cognitive Liberty Legal Fund, which I co-founded with 2 colleagues from my old firm, opened its doors 14 months after that night. Our first 3 clients were former Caldwell employees who had been subject to similar compliance frameworks: loyalty contracts, behavioral modification schemes disguised as professional development, NDA terms that had been used to prevent them from disclosing coercive workplace practices. The legal mechanisms were different from what had been done to Marcus, but the architecture was the same. Someone powerful had decided another person's choices belonged to them and had built systems accordingly. A journalist who covered the Caldwell case asked me once what I thought the point of all of it was: the years of preparation, the risk, the particular way I had chosen to let it unfold. I told her I had spent a long time thinking about the difference between taking something back and building something new. Revenge, I said, is about taking back. Justice is about building something that replaces what was broken with something more solid. I wanted the second thing, not the first. I wanted Marcus to have himself back. I wanted the people Adeline had quietly diminished over 30 years to have some accounting. And I wanted to use what I had built. All those files, all that documentation, all that very long and unglamorous patience, to make it harder for the next Adeline to do what she had done, to the next person who loved the wrong family. Whether that was worth 5 years of living a double life, I genuinely don't know. Some days it feels like the most obvious choice I ever made. Some days I think about the first year of our marriage, before I understood what I was in the middle of. When Marcus and I would cook dinner together on Friday nights and he would read to me from whatever he was reading, and it felt like the thing I had always wanted to find. And I miss that version of things with a sharpness I don't always know what to do with. What I know is this: he's still here, we're still here. And most Fridays now, when the week has been quiet enough, he cooks and I open the wine and he reads aloud from something he found and thought I'd like. In the kitchen, the actual kitchen and the actual Friday. And it is not the same as before, because nothing is, but it is real in a way that it wasn't for a long time. That's what I was building toward. All of it. The encrypted files and the patient years and the night in the 42nd floor dining room with the harbor dark outside and my husband finally looking at me like he was the one asking the questions now. That. People ask me sometimes whether I regret the years I spent building that case while staying inside a marriage that had already been hollowed out around me. I understand why they ask. From the outside it probably looks like patience bordering on something unhealthy. 3 years of encrypted files and burner phones and practicing expressions in a guest bathroom mirror. What I tell them is that I wasn't staying for Adeline's version of the marriage. I was staying for the evidence, yes, but also for Marcus. And those 2 things were never separate in my mind. Here's what I actually believe: stripped of anything grand, people who build systems of control over other people are counting on one thing above everything else. They are counting on no one caring enough to pay close enough attention for long enough. Adeline built what she built over decades because every person who noticed something wrong either didn't trust their own perception or didn't have the standing to act on it or simply left. I had the skills to notice, the stubbornness to stay, and the specific professional training to turn observation into documentation. That combination is not common. I know that. I don't think it makes me special. I think it makes me responsible for having used it. What I keep returning to, years later, is the moment Marcus said "don't" to his mother. One word, before I could even register what she was reaching for, he stepped in front of it. I had spent 3 years wondering whether there was enough of the real Marcus left to find, and in that one syllable I had my answer. He had been listening. He had been watching me read that document, and something had cracked open just enough for him to see clearly for a moment. And he chose to act on what he saw. That was his. Nobody built that response into him. That was the man choosing. I think about what it must have taken to override years of conditioning in a single second with a single word, with no preparation, under pressure. I think most people don't understand how much strength that actually requires, because it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It looks like a man saying "don't" to his mother at a dinner table, but I know what it cost. I was there. The thing about intelligence, real intelligence, not just the kind that scores well, is that it has to be aimed at something that matters, or it's just a tool sitting in a drawer. I aimed mine at uncovering what was true. Adeline aimed hers at maintaining control. Those 2 applications of intelligence will produce different outcomes over time, and they did. Not because the universe rewards virtue in some automatic way, but because systems built on deception require constant maintenance and constant expansion, and eventually they become too complex to hold together. The truth, by contrast, only needs to exist. It doesn't need tending. It just needs someone patient enough to find it and brave enough to bring it into a room. The bravery part is the one I'm least certain I've given myself full credit for. It's easier, honestly, to attribute what I did to strategy and skill. Those feel clean and earned. Admitting that I was also scared, that I sat on the edge of that guest bathtub on more mornings than I can count, and genuinely did not know if I was doing the right thing or just the stubborn thing. That's harder. But it's also true. Courage isn't the absence of doubt. It's the decision to move anyway, carefully, with your eyes open towards something that matters. Marcus is still finding out who he is. So, in some ways, am I. What we both know now is that who we are is ours to find out. Nobody else gets to answer that question for us. That's not a small thing. For a long time, it wasn't guaranteed.